He thought silence meant indifference, that your detachment was a cold withdrawal, a quiet punishment meant to provoke him. But he was wrong. It wasn't about him. It was never about him. It was about you, choosing yourself, claiming your time, your energy, your spirit. And yet, it haunts him. Because the woman who detaches doesn't beg, doesn't plead, doesn't try to convince. She doesn't scream to be seen. She simply fades into herself. And it is in that fading that she becomes unforgettable. This isn't a tantrum. It's a transformation. Not an act of rebellion, but a rite of return to wholeness, to sovereignty, to truth. Carl Jung once said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that is what your detachment does. It pulls him inward, forces him to sit in the quiet you left behind. The noise of your affection used to drown out the hollow echo inside him. Now that it's gone, he can hear every creaking splinter of his own unhealed places. He haunts the ghost of your energy, not because you did anything wrong, but because you stopped doing too much. Your stillness is a mirror, and he sees himself clearly in it for the first time. No projection, no fantasy, no version of you carefully curated for his comfort. Just silence, just space, just you as you are, and your refusal to shrink or chase or fill the void. That void was his, and the ego doesn't know how to love what it can't possess. It only knows how to grasp, to demand, to feed. But you starved it, not cruelly, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. You stopped leaking energy into places that didn't know how to hold it with reverence. He remembers the way your voice softened him, the way your presence filled a room with quiet electricity, the way your laugh lit something ancient inside him, even if he pretended not to notice. He remembers, not because he wants to, but because the psyche remembers what the ego tries to suppress. Detachment isn't forgetting. It's sacred remembering. You remembered who you were before you were taught to tie your worth to someone else's attention. You remembered how silence can be a prayer, a boundary, a funeral for the version of you that once begged for scraps. And this new version of you, the one cloaked in mystery, wrapped in sovereignty, dripping in peace, is far more dangerous than the woman who once explained herself. The anima, in Jungian terms, is the feminine presence within a man's unconscious. And when you detach, when you vanish not just physically but emotionally, spiritually, he doesn't just miss you. He misses a part of himself he never developed. He aches for something ancient, something primal, something that reminds him of the sacred feminine he abandoned inside his own psyche. But your silence is not an invitation. It is a closure, a seal placed on a chapter that asked too much of your light. And yet, he can't stop replaying moments in his mind. The time you looked at him as if he were made of stars. The way you listened, not just to respond, but to understand. The way you held space, even when he filled it with fear. He felt powerful when you were soft. But now that you're gone, now that you're sovereign, now that you've become the embodiment of emotional discipline, he's left with a hollow performance of masculinity that no longer lands. That's what haunts him. Not the memory of what you did, but the realization of what he failed to receive, of what he now sees with crystalline clarity. Your detachment was never punishment. It was prophecy. Some women weaponize silence. Others inhabit it. Yours is not the silence of punishment. It is the silence of elevation. A sacred boundary drawn in gold between who you were and who you refuse to be anymore. And it lingers long after you've gone. Not as an echo, but as a presence. A presence that seeps into his bones in the stillness of the night, when there are no distractions left to numb the truth. That presence is you, not the woman he tried to mold, but the woman who became untouchable the moment she no longer needed to be understood. It haunts him because he never got to finish the story. The male ego craves completion, an ending he can name, an outcome he can own. But your detachment offered no closure, no clean conclusion. It was a door that closed without slamming, a chapter that ended mid-sentence. And the masculine mind, especially one ruled by control, cannot tolerate ambiguity. You left him with a riddle. And his pride won't let him ask for the answer. Carl Jung taught that what we repress in the unconscious always returns, often disguised, often distorted, but always there, lingering like smoke in the subconscious. That's what you've become to him. A wraith that glides silently through the corridors of his memories, not in rage, not in need, but in sovereign peace. You are not chasing him in this world, and that makes you ever present in his inner one. He didn't understand the price of your presence until it was gone. He mistook your patience for permanence. He assumed your softness was naivete. He thought he could delay respect and still retain your warmth. But now, in the absence of your energy, he begins to grasp the cost. The cost of being held by a woman who knew how to see him clearly, and the deeper cost of never seeing her in return. And that's the thing about a woman who detaches. Her silence doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't plead. It hums, low and slow, like a frequency the soul cannot ignore. It sinks beneath the skin, bypasses the rational mind, and speaks directly to the spirit. He may distract himself with noise, with others, with performance. But deep down, in the quiet spaces between distractions, he feels the shift. Something precious is no longer available. And he knows it wasn't taken. It was withdrawn. The Stoics wrote of detachment not as disconnection, but as transcendence. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." You embody this freedom now. The freedom of no longer needing to be chosen. The freedom of choosing yourself. That, more than anything, is what unsettles him. You are no longer waiting at the gates of his recognition. You have built a kingdom within. Your detachment reveals his dependence, not just on your presence, but on your emotional labor, on your ability to soothe his wounds, to validate his chaos, to be the lighthouse while he drifted. Without you, the sea is darker, the waves louder, and the silence endless. But let it be endless. Let it be wide and vast and holy, because it is in that silence that transformation begins. Not just for him, but for you. You are not a pause between his sentences. You are the author of your own story now, and your silence is not a blank page. It is sacred scripture written in unseen ink. You were not born to be the echo of a man's uncertainty. You were born to be the voice of your own becoming. A woman's detachment is not an ending. It is an awakening. And that awakening burns deeper than any dramatic goodbye, because it does not scream, it does not justify, it simply exits. It steps away without apology, without explanation, without seeking understanding from the very place that once refused to offer it. He will remember the woman who didn't flinch when he pulled away, the one who didn't collapse into sorrow when he went silent, the one who didn't beg for scraps of affection when the warmth began to fade. She didn't retaliate. She simply vanished into her own stillness. And that, more than anger, more than confrontation, more than chaos, is what seared her into his psyche. Jung called the shadow the hidden side of the self, the dark twin of the ego that contains everything we repress. And when you detach, you become a mirror to his shadow, not through confrontation, but through absence. Your departure forces him to meet the parts of himself you once shielded him from, the neglect, the pride, the fear of intimacy, the wounds he never tended. Your silence is the crack in his facade, and through it pours all that he tried to deny. Your detachment carries the energy of the sacred feminine in its highest form, not passive, but unbothered, not reactive, but wise. You no longer perform your worth for his recognition. You no longer try to be understood by the one who listened only to respond. You have stopped feeding the fantasy that he can awaken without losing you first. And now, your absence roars louder than your presence ever did. You became the woman who no longer needed to explain her boundaries because her life began enforcing them for her. The woman who no longer over-explained her emotions because her peace spoke louder than her pain. The woman who no longer fought to be chosen because she had finally chosen herself. This is why you haunt him. Not because of what you gave, but because of what you reclaimed. You reclaimed your time, your voice, your softness, your sacred anger. You no longer lent him the emotional architecture to keep his illusions standing. You let the walls fall, and now he sees the ruins of a connection he never truly honored. He once believed your vulnerability was weakness, that your emotions made you fragile. But what he failed to realize was that it takes far more strength to walk away in silence than to scream for someone to stay. Because the woman who detaches is not empty. She is full of herself, and in that fullness, she becomes untouchable. She becomes the embodiment of what he secretly craved but could never control. He may not admit it out loud, he may even act indifferent. But deep within, he will compare every connection that follows to the quiet power you embodied when you left. He will search for your softness in women who chase, He will try to find your emotional intelligence in dynamics built on performance, but he will never find it again. Because the woman who masters detachment doesn't repeat lessons she's already learned. She doesn't circle back to be rewounded by familiar hands. She ascends, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And clarity, for a man who lives in unconscious patterns, is terrifying. You didn't become silent because you had nothing to say. You became silent because he was no longer worthy of hearing it. You didn't detach because you stopped caring. You detached because you started caring for yourself. That distinction is everything. There is a kind of woman who leaves no trace, yet leaves a mark on the soul. She walks away with grace, and suddenly the air feels heavier. Not because she was loud, not because she was dramatic, but because she carried light with her. And now it's gone. Her silence becomes an ache he can't name, a soft echo that lingers in the background of his life, no matter how far forward he tries to move. She haunts not because she cursed him, but because she blessed him with a presence he didn't know how to receive. Her detachment isn't revenge, it's sacred disinterest. The quiet realization that her worth was never a question and that staying would only delay her becoming. And now that she is no longer accessible, she becomes unforgettable. In Jungian terms, the male psyche often projects the anima, the idealized image of a woman, onto real women. But projection cannot last forever. Eventually, reality pierces illusion. And when it does, the man is left with a task: to integrate what he denied, to absorb what he once idealized, to face the feminine not as fantasy, but as force. Your detachment triggered that task. You became the catalyst, not through manipulation, but through neutrality. And neutrality is terrifying to the unhealed masculine, because it doesn't offer control, it doesn't offer resistance, it offers nothing. And in that nothingness, he meets himself. He will remember how you stopped chasing, how your eyes no longer sparkled when he entered the room, how you stopped over-explaining your hurt, stopped proving your value, stopped tending the emotional garden of someone who never offered soil. He will remember how you no longer reacted to his silence with fear, but mirrored it with stillness, how you replaced pleading with presence, how your absence felt like both a punishment and a prophecy, because he finally saw you as you were, not as he imagined. And now every woman who follows you will inherit a man who has glimpsed the kind of power he didn't know existed. He will compare their affection to your depth, their eagerness to your detachment, their surface to your soul. Not because you were perfect, but because you were true, true to your essence, true to your inner knowing. True enough to walk away the moment you realized love without reciprocity is just self-betrayal in disguise. You are the mirror he cannot shatter. Because it was never about breaking you. It was about seeing himself. And now, without your energy to project onto, he is left with the raw image of who he has become in your absence. You became the sacred storm, the woman who chose peace over performance, depth over drama, intuition over impulse. And when he lies awake at night, it won't be the sound of your voice he misses. It will be the space you once held, the safety you once offered, the version of himself that only ever existed in your eyes. But that version was never yours to carry. You laid it down with love, not to wound him, but to finally hold yourself. And this, more than anything, is why your detachment will always haunt him, because it wasn't a rejection, it was a revelation. A woman's detachment is not a vanishing act, it is a resurrection. He will wake up one day and realize the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with all the things he never gave you, filled with words you were too tired to repeat, filled with love you no longer had the desire to pour into hollow spaces. Your silence wasn't absence, it was presence, finally redirected inward. When a woman reaches that threshold, something ancient within her shifts. She stops trying to be remembered by those who forgot her while she stood right in front of them. She no longer throws her pearls into the ocean of male apathy, hoping for waves of recognition to come crashing back. You stopped performing. And in doing so, you became a mystery. The most haunting thing a woman can do is walk away without bitterness. To choose detachment over destruction. To step out of the frame, not because she wasn't worthy of the picture, but because she finally realized she was the masterpiece all along. And this is what makes your detachment unforgettable. It wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It wasn't laced with venom. It was quiet, clean, precise, a surgical separation between you and the part of you that once tolerated confusion as affection. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, required us to integrate the unconscious, to make the unseen known, and your detachment did just that. It revealed the invisible threads he never saw when he thought your presence was guaranteed. He didn't notice how much of your energy sustained the connection, how your tenderness balanced his chaos, how your consistency masked his unpredictability. He didn't see the structure you created until it collapsed. Now, in your absence, he sees it everywhere, in the way no one else listens like you did, in the way no one else holds space like you did, in the way no one else sees him and chooses to stay the way you once did. But that woman no longer exists, because detachment rewires the soul. It purifies your sense of self-worth. It teaches you to be whole without the echo of another's approval. It teaches you to walk away not because you want to be chased, but because you want to be free. And freedom leaves an imprint on the man who thought he had time. He sees now that your love wasn't ordinary, that your patience wasn't passive, that your silence was a declaration, that if he couldn't meet you in your depths, he would never touch you again. Not your skin, not your heart, not your world. You left not to be missed. You left because you remembered. You were never meant to live in fragments. And what haunts him most is this: he never got to meet the woman you are now, the woman you became after you stopped shrinking. After you stopped trying to earn love that should have arrived freely, after you detached from the fantasy that he would one day rise to meet you, you rose alone. And in that rising, you became untouchable. Let him remember. Let him ache. Let the echo of your silence teach him the lessons your words never could. Because the woman who detaches is not cold. She is clear. And clarity is what haunts the man who once thrived in confusion.